Welcome to FailCraft, the podcast where we dive into the messy, real side of success and explore how setbacks, failures, and challenges become the stepping stones for growth, clarity, and purpose. I'm your host, Ezekiel, and today we are joined by Dr. Melissa Milanak. She is a licensed clinical psychologist, executive consultant, and an international keynote speaker specializing in workplace effectiveness and mental well being. With over 20 years of clinical experience, she founded Mind Impact Consulting to help individuals and organizations navigate the heavy toll of stress, anxiety, and burnout. She's a TEDx speaker, the author of the upcoming book, Sleep for Success, and she joins us today to discuss why we mistakenly compromise our rest in the pursuit of achievement, how to rewire our mental habits, and why sleep is not the impossible dream. Dr. Melissa, I am really honored and excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
It is a pleasure to have you here. So let's dive into it. You work with high performing executives, professional athletes, and leaders, who operate in intense environments. In modern business culture, sleep deprivation is frequently worn as a badge of honor, a metric to prove how hard someone is working. So when you are, consulting with an ambitious professional, someone who is completely exhausted but terrified that resting will cause them to lose their edge. So what's the breaking point where they finally realize their hustle is actually destroying their true performance?
I think for so many people, they convince themselves that they can get by on less sleep. And they keep thinking that they have so much else that they need to prioritize. But oftentimes people don't initially realize all of the areas of their life that are being impacted. All of a sudden their workouts aren't working for them and they're plateauing. They're not building the muscles, or they're more injury prone. Maybe they find that their memory isn't as sharp, or their ability to focus and pay attention. They get more easily distracted. Also, for a lot of people, it impacts their ability to regulate their emotions and to be resilient. The small setback all of a sudden impacts them a bit more. Maybe it's their relationships where they're finding that their fuse is a little bit shorter, or they're not able to fully connect with their loved ones or to be able to be present. It truly can impact every single aspect of their lives. And for most people, though, they keep going until they hit that point that the body shuts down, that they just need to rest, or they're just feeling unhealthy, or realizing that they have had a big mistake with their career or some type of issue there. So what I get to do is go in and help people before they get to that breaking point, before they hit complete burnout where nothing seems enjoyable anymore, or they just feel like they don't have that drive. How can we use sleep and leverage sleep to rejuvenate that energy and excitement as well as health?
So, when someone, maybe a professional or a leader, when they ignore their body's need for recovery, so what are the first invisible cognitive fractures, that actually begin to break down, in their decision making?
So there's a number of things. One of them is going to be that whenever we are sleeping, we're typically going to see that our physical body is going to repair in the first half of the night more. And we're going to spend more time for our brain repairing in the later hours of our sleep. And so for many people, it can be some of the initial, their memory, attention, and focus isn't as quick as they want it to be. Or they're feeling more of the physical fatigue. And so they're having to drag themselves out of bed to go where they're going. But then it's just, oh, that's just how it is. You snooze, you lose. Time is money. Everybody's tired. So I'm just going to have an extra coffee. Or now it's the end of the day and I can't fall asleep. So a lot of people might have that drink in the evening or find a way to self-medicate. And so now all of a sudden they are on this cycle of what do they need to do to wake themselves up? What do they need to get themselves to fall asleep? And so once they get stuck in that cycle, they're realizing that things aren't as enjoyable as they used to be. When the joy starts to go away from it, that's a really big indicator as well.
Absolutely. So, Melissa, I'm going to tell you a really short story about my
Yeah.
own personal experience through sleep and how it resulted into burnout. So for me, I recently graduated from the university. So as an undergraduate student back in the days, I wanted to be always productive. I wanted to be always studying, always working, always, pushing my academic agenda and making sure I achieve my set academic goals for a particular semester. And for that reason, I tend to deprioritize sleep, unknowing to me the importance of sleep. I would go weeks, lengths of weeks, if not months, on 4 to 5 hours of sleep in the night, and still go to classes, still do all the academic work I have to do. And I noticed that during those moments, after a while, I began to notice that I am no longer really able to be present in the moment. In classes, I am fatigued. I am sleepy after, I'm not really able to pay full attention on a 2 hour lecture. When I go to church on Sunday, I often struggle with sleep during sermons. I try to actively keep myself awake. It's not natural for me to just listen and be attentive to the sermon. But I began to wonder what was wrong with me. What was wrong with me? And, as something I did personally to maybe make it less hard for me, maybe on Saturday evenings, I'll try to go to bed very early. I'll try to catch maybe 6 hours of sleep, or before the night on Saturday, I might just get a long nap. But it didn't work out because I think it's because it has gone that long for a very long time. Sustaining that 4 to 5 hours of sleep, and I don't really think those one day of long stretch sleep can actually accommodate for all the missed time. So I like to go into the sleeping dynamics. Do you think for a burned out professional, who maybe has been sustaining a couple of hours, a few hours of sleep per day, that is not really up to the recommended, sleeping time daily. Do you think they can actually recover by just having maybe a long weekend of sleeping streak, and the next week they get kicking as usual like before?
So definitely not. In general, it takes 4 days to make up for 1 hour of lost sleep. So because we know that it takes in general about 4 days to make up for 1 hour of lost sleep, so that 2-day weekend isn't even half of what people need. And it's not the same. So a lot of people say, okay, well, I'm going to have a really busy day, so I'm going to eat a bigger meal. We don't have a camel hump to store water, to store sleep. It's not one of those things where we can just sleep for a few days and then hope it's going to persist through the entire week. Doesn't mean that there may not be times where we need more sleep or where we try to play the catch-up game. But in general, depriving yourself of sleep during the week and then just sleeping more on the weekend isn't going to be enough to truly have your brain and body get what it needs to be its healthiest and to be performing at its optimal best. It's more
Absolutely.
the consistency throughout the week.
Absolutely.
But I will say one thing to that. I think that a lot of people have the myth or the misbelief that they have to spend more time in bed to get their sleep. And that's actually not the best belief. It's actually becoming an efficient sleeper. So it's being able that 90 to 95% of the time that you're in bed, that you're actually asleep. So falling asleep within 10 to 15 minutes, sleeping through the night without waking up 4 or 5 times, when you wake up in the morning feeling rested, all of those awakenings throughout the night, that fragmented sleep, actually makes your sleep quality worse. So it's not just the quantity or the number of hours, but it's the quality and the type of sleep that we're getting.
So you talk about becoming an efficient sleeper, and you also talk about sleep quality. So, what does it take to become an efficient sleeper? And is it just about the length of time you're able to sleep straight without any interruptions?
So there are a few things. Usually what we'll do is we have people start with something called their sleep window. And so the step one is to get a set window with a consistent bedtime and wake time 7 days a week. Now, I understand that that may not always be practical. You may have life events and things, but if we can get relatively consistent, that's going to help us to have better quality and quantity sleep. What I mean by that, if you usually eat dinner around the same time each night, you get hungry around that time because your body knows to
Yeah.
expect food.
Yes.
When you go to bed around the same time every night, your body's going to know when to feel tired because it can expect the sleep. And if you're waking up at the same time every morning, no matter when you went to bed, now your brain and body, they can figure out when you go to sleep and say, okay, tonight Ezekiel's giving me 5 hours. How do I optimize how I allocate to heal his body and his mind for him to be his healthiest? But if your body doesn't know how many hours of sleep it's going to get, then it can't optimize the quality of sleep because it can't always prioritize and allocate how much time it spends healing the body and the brain. So that's where having the consistent wake time is so important, and the bedtime. So if we can figure out how much sleep we're currently getting and then set as consistent of a window as we can, and then we evaluate from there. If we are waking up multiple times throughout the night, we might need to shrink that window a little bit. As we get older, we need less sleep. Or maybe we're sleeping through the night, but we still feel exhausted. So we might need to grow that window a bit. There are many ways to adjust it and tweak it, but if we can get ourselves to a bit of a consistent schedule, then our body and brain can adjust. The best way to look at it, if you wear like the wearable devices, the trackers, there are many types of sleep throughout the course of the night, but deep sleep and REM sleep, those two stages, when we pay attention, deep sleep is where our body heals and repairs. REM sleep is where our brain heals and repairs. That's oversimplified, but the easiest way to think about it. 20 to 25% of your sleep each night, we want to see spent in deep sleep, and about 20 to 25% spent in REM sleep. If that allocation is happening, then you can start to get a sense that you're getting a proper amount.
Absolutely. That was a really insightful response. So, one frustrating experience for people is, when you finally get into bed, only to start.
Can shut your brain off? Yes, I was thinking you were saying
Yes,
you're going to get into bed, but you can't shut your brain off.
exactly. That was what I was going to say. You get into bed only for you to have your brain immediately turn on and, just start obsessing over the next day's problem, that kind of thing. So what was the actual mechanism happening there, psychologically, and how can we practically shut it off?
So, for so many people, what's happening, so our brain is designed to process everything that's happened throughout the day. And ideally, we would take time to do that, to think through the day, to reflect on it, to plan for the next day ahead. But for most of us, we don't give our brain the time to do that. We're so busy, we're going from thing to thing. And so it's not until we climb in bed that now we have this quiet time to think and plan and process. And so our brain capitalizes on it. And that's why it's not letting us fall asleep. So what we want to do is we want to set aside time to do that when we're not in bed. So about 15 to 20 minutes before we go to bed, it's usually recommended take a notepad and a pencil, no technology, and make sure you're doing this outside of bed. And you're going to write down your to-do list for the next day, all the errands you have to run, all the things you need to complete, all the planning for the next day. And then on the other side of the page, you're going to write everything that's running through your mind. So whether it's things about family or work or kids or health or whatever it is, but you usually will set a timer for around 5 minutes, and you just keep writing and keep writing to the level of exhaustion until the time runs out. That's not creating worries before bed. What it's doing is it's helping to empty the brain with all the things that you hadn't given it the time to deal with during the day. So then you put that on your nightstand and get in bed. And then if your mind still is going, you actually would get out of bed and write more and then get back in bed. Because what it's doing is it's teaching your brain that in bed isn't where you think, isn't where your brain works. And so just like people that have a dog as a pet and they keep putting it outside to house train it, you're taking your brain and you're putting it outside of bed and teaching it. You will have time to process and plan, but you don't get to do that when you're in bed. And so it will actually, over a few days, people will find that their brain is shutting off more when they get in bed because it no longer is needed to be working at full gear because it already did. Now, if you're in bed and it still won't shut off, many people will do something called cognitive shuffling, where you'll pick a word, say the word blanket. That's, you think of that with bed, a comfortable, relaxing word, picture it, and then take each letter of the word and start thinking about all other words that begin with that letter. So start with blanket, the letter B. Okay, ball, balloon, and you get and then when you run out of words, then with the letter L. And by the time you get parsed the way through the word, most people have fallen asleep and won't even finish the word, but their brain was able to shut off.
Yes. So to add to that, I read something a while ago, maybe watched a video. I don't really know, but I know I have a memory of that. When someone explained that, for you to actually fall asleep, when you get to bed and your mind starts thinking of other things, if you really want to fall asleep, one thing you can also do is to just start counting from 1 down to as much as a number as you can get to in your mind. You say 1, 2, 3, 4 in your mind like that, and before you know it, you fall asleep, like falling asleep. So I'd like to hear your own opinion on that. Do you think it's also one way we can actually get our minds to fall asleep when we're in bed?
So all of those strategies can work. Partially what we know is that if it's something that you can do without a lot of thought, so like the counting 1, 2, for some people, they can do that, but their mind still starts to wander. So usually we want something that's going to engage the mind just enough that it can no longer focus on the planning or the other things, and it has to only focus on the task ahead. So we might say, work backwards instead. So say, start with 120, or 143 and subtract 17 and then go to the next and the next. So things that can help the brain to be able to disconnect just enough but still engage. That's where things like counting or counting sheep, those grounding exercises help, and they're much better for your sleep than watching TV or listening to something on your phone.
I see now. They say that it's a very popular quote that to fall asleep, you have to first pretend that you are asleep. Is that really true? You're the expert here. I'd like to hear your own opinion.
So I think some of that is, when they're saying pretend that you're asleep, is really preparing your body and your brain to be able to sleep. So if we're really tense, or if our body is in that fight or flight protection mode, then we're not going to be able to rest because we're not relaxed. And so we need to have our brain shutting down, and we need to have our body calm enough as if we were already asleep, so that it doesn't perceive that there's a threat. If you were sleeping in a tent in the woods and there was a lion around your tent, your body's not going to let you sleep. It wants you to stay awake to be prepared in case you get attacked. And so that's where, if we pretend we're asleep in the sense of getting our body relaxed and our brain to relax, then it's going to be easier to be able to transition into a sleep state. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. So, Melissa, we are surrounded by technology, wearables, and the temptation to snooze our alarms. so is our reliance on digital metrics, and quick fixes, is it accidentally sabotaging the natural sleep cycles we so desperately need?
So there's a lot of yes and no on that one. In general, our devices are causing a lot of disruption to our sleep. A big part of that is the exposure to light, because our eyes perceive light and they send messages to our brain that say it's light out, which triggers us to stay awake. When it's dark out, that triggers our body and brain to prepare for sleep and to sleep. So when we're on all of our phones and our devices, that light, the sun doesn't set because it's still very bright. Now, things like our wearable devices that can track our sleep, sometimes those are helpful, because if you are paying attention to something and you're noticing, I was on my phone last night before I went to sleep and I didn't sleep as well, or I ate certain foods, or I did certain things, then those devices can help us to see a better, just like a heart rate monitor lets us know if our heart rate is too high. So some of the technology can be helpful, but a lot of it ends up disrupting our sleep. Hitting the snooze button is really bad for your sleep. Those 8 or 9 minutes of snooze sleep aren't enough time to get you into a restful stage of sleep. It's like eating empty calories. So snooze button, bad thing.
Okay.
Scrolling on your phone late at night in bed, bad thing. Wearable device to help you to see if you're getting a good quality sleep, most of the time can be a good thing. So not all technology is bad, but a lot of it we aren't using in helpful ways.
All right. That was a really interesting response. Sometimes we think that when we've not had enough sleep and the alarm goes off, we think that we can salvage extra 10 or 15 minutes of sleep. I'll just be fine. But then the alarm goes off again and you even feel worse than you were in the last 15 minutes.
It's actually better. Some people will actually set their alarm earlier so they can hit the snooze button a few times.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that it feels good to say no to something or feel like we're in control in the morning. But it's actually better to just set the alarm for 10 or 15 minutes later. Typically, we'll get better, healthy, restorative sleep versus hitting the snooze button. And then we just kind of doze in and out of sleep instead of fully being in a stage where our body or brain can heal itself.
Absolutely. So before we wrap things up here, Dr. Melissa, I'd like us to talk about your book, your upcoming book, Sleep for Success. So firstly, just give us a general overview of its content and tell us what gave you the motivation to write this book.
So for the book, what I found is I was giving so many of these presentations and working with my patients across all different backgrounds. And people would be searching for information, but they didn't have one source that would provide them practical tips and strategies that were research and science backed. So it wasn't just an anecdote from someone, but there was so much information. It became so overwhelming or it wasn't relevant to their lives. And so I wanted to have a book that the busy person could, the corporate exec that's flying 200 days a year and the stay-at-home mom alike could use it to leverage strategies to directly apply to their life to be able to sleep better. Because when you're sleeping better, everything changes for the good.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, speaking from the point of someone who had a really bad sleep schedule, a couple of months ago, and right now I haven't corrected that. I can really tell. And I look back at those, like I could have really been a better performer, in all that I did if I just had better sleep, if I had prioritized sleep, a bit more. So I can, really agree to what you said there. So to wrap things up, Dr. Melissa, for the listeners in our audience who actually, listener who is ready to thrive instead of just survive, and they want to go access your free video library of actionable skills, or they want to go connect with you, or they want to go learn more about your upcoming book, where is the best place for them to go?
My website is going to be the best location. So it's my name, my first and last name.com. I think that would be a really great place for them to access. As you said, the free video libraries. There's different sleep guides and free resources on there. They can put their information in if they want to do a consultation. If they prefer social media, they can follow me on Instagram and other social media sites. But the melissamilanak.com, the website, will be the most comprehensive and have the most free resources on there.
I'll be sure to have the website linked in the show notes of the podcast. For the listeners, you can scroll down and find it. Indeed, it has been, a really insightful, valuable, and an amazing conversation with you here today. And I'm truly honored having you as a guest on FailCraft. Once again, Melissa, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you for having me, and I will tell all your listeners sweet dreams.